Is it just my imagination? How do I know if it's my guide talking to me or if it's just in my head? Am I just overthinking all of this? These are the questions, team. This is what we are answering in today's video, and I am super excited to make it. Mostly because it is something that everybody struggles with at some point during their spiritual awakening, including myself. This is absolutely something that people struggle with, that they have a hard time with, which is discerning who is actually communicating and how can I figure out when it's my guides talking, or I'm talking to a ghost, or talking to a lost family member, a past family member. Lost, where did you go? It's past family member. I guess it works too if you're doing like criminal stuff with lost family members. I guess that could also be a thing. I was speaking about the past family members, but I guess it applies both ways. How can I figure out what is just me and what is actual spiritual stuff? And that can get really confusing and really convoluted, and I understand why we all overthink this and dive into it, because one, we've been trained basically since the time we were itty bitties that our imagination is not a safe place for us to be. We're just making it up, etc., etc. And two, we want to make sure we're not just making it up. We don't want this just to be in our head. We actually want to communicate and have validation of that. So we're going to talk about it today. I got to apologize too. I'm still just slightly under the weather. So if I sound all nasally and gross, that's where that's coming from. It's just, it won't leave me be. It also doesn't help that my entire neighborhood is painted yellow right now by pollen. Like, it is absolutely ridiculous. It literally looks like people took sidewalk chalk and just like colored the entire road yellow, but it's tree pollen, and this happens once a year, but for like 2 to 3 weeks usually, and we're right in the thick of it. So that is not helping this to go away. Before we dive any deeper, I do just want to say thank you so much for being here. If you could like, subscribe, comment on my channel so you could be here for longer, I would love that. It really helps me and helps boost this place. You know the deal. You know how it helps. You know why it's a thing. But I really would just appreciate that from you. Also, this episode topic was voted on by my amazing patrons. I have a fabulous Patreon. We do so much different stuff in there. Also, for my top tier patrons, I just expanded my offerings there a little bit even further. Those are my Intuitive Initiate patrons, which you will hear about in just a second, because I do thank them at the beginning of these videos. For my Intuitive Initiate patrons, we now have our own basically group app sort of situation. Think Facebook group, but it's not on Facebook. We do have that through my website, which is really cool. So that is an expand offering where everyone can practice together and have more community, which I am super duper loving. I'm also working on expanding some offerings for some of the other tiers as well, which is really exciting. I want to just keep adding more and more to the Patreon space. Being spiritual and psychic is genuinely a really lonely thing if you don't have community and others of those that you can speak to about this. So I'm trying to create the Patreon space to be a community-based space where we can all hang out together, we can all communicate together, we can all expand our psychic abilities together, and that's where I can show up and do mentorship, and we can do meditation stuff and all sorts of different things. So Patreon offerings are going to be even more expansive, but if you want to check out all of the magic that is already in there, which it is a lot, I do a lot of stuff in Patreon, go ahead and look below. I will link it for you. Also, thank you to my Intuitive Initiate patrons, who are Alexandria, Alyssa, Arson, Carrie, Cheryl, Danny, Danielle, Katie, Meg, Rebecca, Sarah C, Sarah S, and Stephanie. That's it? Yeah, that's it. Thank you all so much. Being in my Patreon, being my Intuitive Initiates, you're all beautiful, wonderful, incredible people, and I'm so lucky to know you, genuinely, and I love how much I'm already watching all of you expand and share ideas and collaborate. It's just chef's kiss. And this video hopefully will help all of you to continue on that train as well. So this is one of those videos that I think is really important, and I want to start out by saying, before I even dive into like the meat and potatoes of the conversation, I really want to start out by just saying how your psychic spiritual gifts present is valid. How you work on those psychic spiritual gifts is valid. How you dive in and your process for growing those psychic spiritual gifts is valid. There is no right way and wrong way to do any of this stuff. There is no right way for your spiritual journey to occur. There's no wrong way for your spiritual journey to occur. However you're growing, you are growing, and that is okay. So I don't want you to watch this video and get down on yourself, be like, oh, okay, I gotta try these things. And if it doesn't work perfectly the first time, get stuck. That is not why I'm making this. If anything, I hope this video can just be a reflection for you that your process is beautiful and your process is awesome and your process is exactly what it needs to be, because that is how things show up for us. And the more in tune we get with the universe, the more in tune we get with our own process, the easier it's going to be, and the more you're going to get the validation that you're looking for. So I just want to start off by saying that before we go any further, because I don't want you to be down on yourself. Let's talk about imagination.
Imagination.
The reason I want to start with imagination, because the question I get so often is it just my imagination? How do I know if it's just my imagination? I just think I'm really imaginative. It's just in my head. It is your imagination. That is kind of the point, actually, which I know sounds counterintuitive, because a lot of people are like, what do you mean? My imagination's fake or pretend? That's a limiting belief, my friends. It's not. Your imagination is actually the way in which we connect with the spiritual, magical elements of the universe in a really concrete and tangible way that pulls it into this reality. Now, I'm not saying that everything you've ever imagined is 100% true. I am saying, though, that your imagination is your source, your ability, and your connection point to connect to your psychic abilities, to connect that all to all that is, to connect to channeling in different beings and out there in the universe, you name it. It starts with your imagination, period. One of the biggest disservices that our society does to us is convincing us at a very, very young age that our imagination is fake, pretend, false, and untrustworthy. Because it's not. It genuinely is not. So if you get one thing from this video, I truly hope it is that. Your imagination is a beautiful source of flow. Your imagination is necessary for your psychic abilities to connect with. It just is. If you hold any of those limiting beliefs where, oh, it's just my imagination, or if you have a beautiful, wonderful spiritual experience, or just like a brief communication with a guide and you're like, yes, I totally believe in that. And then immediately you feel your brain kick in and be like, that was just in your imagination. What are you talking about? That wasn't actually you. That is something that I would question your brain on and be like, if it was my imagination, how is that fake or pretend? Why is that bad? Because that is not the case with your imagination. Anyway, I'm really passionate about that. That is like my own soapbox, to be totally honest, because the disservice that we do people in our lives by making them believe that their imagination is just some false thing that cannot be counted on deeply robs us of our magic. And I think genuinely, if we fostered imagination in children from the time they were born and taught them how to understand the nuances of imagination, how to understand the expansiveness of imagination, how to understand that imagination can be and oftentimes is channeling, then we would have a far more developed society than we do now, that people would be a lot more connected to their psychic abilities than they are now, that the spiritual world around us would be a lot more open and understood than it is now, purely because everyone would be on the same level of understanding that channeling is a real thing. That is the dream, guys. That's part of the reason I do what I do, because I'd really love psychic, spiritual, magic stuff to become everyday conversation that people could just talk about around the dinner table and have it be normal. That is the first thing I want to preface, because most of the time that is where this fear comes from of, oh, I think I might be talking to my guides, but I think it's just in my imagination. I think I maybe had a communication with a nature spirit, but I think it's also just in my imagination. Stop that. Stop it. Okay? Easier said than done, though. I completely understand. Okay, so yes, obviously that still leaves the question, though, but how do I tell when it's my imagination and I'm actually talking to someone, or when it's my imagination and I'm just planning out scenarios or thinking on things? And here are some techniques to actually figure that out. I'm not going to leave you high and dry and just be like, it is your imagination, have fun. Like, no. So here are some really fun techniques to kind of figure that out. Keep in mind, though, do what works best for you. Do what works best for you. This is your own unique individual process, which I think I've probably driven that point home to death at this point, but still. So first off, blind trust is not a requirement. Genuinely. Blind trust is not a requirement for any of your psychic process. And I think that is one of the biggest misunderstandings. That's not the word. Misconceptions. I got there. Misconceptions that people have about spirituality or about developing their psychic abilities or about communicating with their gifts, anything like that, is that you need to trust it. You need to know exactly concretely when something happens, when you're communicating with that thing. And there may be times when you do, but it is not a requirement. And if anything, it is not something that you need to have right off the bat. Trust is something you develop over time, even when it comes to you and your abilities, anything like that. It has to be developed over time in order to be effective. So as you develop that trust, you want to ask for the validations you're needing from your guides, from spirit, from creator, whoever you feel comfortable talking to. I obviously recommend you talk to your guides. Everyone has them. We've talked about that a lot on this channel and on my other platforms. Everyone has spirit guides. You've got them. They're around. So ask them for stuff. If you think you just had an intuitive ping, ask for some validation. If you had a dream that seemed like it was really important, ask for some validation. If you have a conversation with your guides and you really think it's your guides, but then that doubt starts creeping in and sitting on you and being like, is it actually my guides or just my imagination? Ask for validation. And what does that look like exactly? Like asking for validation, it quite literally goes, hey, I think I just had a conversation, but I need someone to validate that that was actually a thing. Ta-da, you ask for validation. Or you can even say, hey guides, send me a specific XYZ sign to validate that we were just communicating. Mine is rainbows. I've talked about this extensively. If you've taken any of my courses, you know even more about asking for a validation. But my validation sign is rainbows. I don't live in a place where it ever rains. It is only sunny. So when I asked for rainbows the very first time, I felt like an absolute idiot because I was like, I'm not going to see rainbows. What do you mean? And then my daughter came home from school and had learned how to draw rainbows that day and had an entire page covered with like 50 rainbows. So who knows how it's going to show up for you, but you can pick a specific sign that is your validation sign from your guides. Like when we have communicated, when I need validations, please send me this specific thing. Or you can be more vague and generalized with it. And I do want to make sure that I point that out. If you're just like, please validate me, I need some validation that this was actually a thing. You can put a time limit on it. You can say before I sleep tonight or before I go back to work on Monday, something like that. That is like a kind of concrete, not necessarily like a date or a time, but a concrete action that signifies time. You know what I mean? You get it. A concrete action that signifies time. Just because time is really wonky in the spirit world and with our spirit guides, putting that on there, you can absolutely do that. Or you can simply say, just validate me. Some things I want you to pay attention though. If you do put that out there, like, hey, I need some validation that this was in fact a ping or a conversation that we had. It is not just, I'm going to see something. You need to pay attention to body feelings. Like, do you have a physical feeling that makes you feel physically a yes, right? Like oftentimes pay attention to like your resonance point, which is like the apex of your ribs. Sometimes there's a physical feeling there that is that yes confirmation feeling, or maybe you get chills, or maybe like me, I have some Alice in Wonderland syndrome stuff. And so oftentimes when I'm doing really deep spiritual work, I hit on that Alice in Wonderland syndrome and I have to break kind of through that wall, but I know I'm doing that deep spiritual work because I hit that, which is basically everything. Sometimes my head feels big or small, or my body feels really skinny, and it's kind of like, it's just like a changing of physical perception that happens. And that is a physical sign for me because it truly feels that way in my physical body, on top of that in my energy. Whatever, if you have a certain physical sign, my guides, when they need to get my attention, press right here really freaking hard. So I know that they're getting the attention. Once I talk to them and have that conversation, that physical pressure goes away. You might have something like that. You might not know what it is just yet. It might take a little bit of asking for the validation, discerning, and learning, which is totally fine, but that could be a thing that you might be having. So that could be a sign of validation. Also, synchronicities. Synchronicities are not to be put by the wayside. This notion of like, wow, what a coincidence. Wow, all these different things. Coincidences or synchronicities. Repeating numbers. Someone saying something earlier in the day that you haven't talked about in years, and then another person bringing up that same topic later in the afternoon. Anything like that. Buying a scratcher, scratching that scratcher off, not winning the jackpot, but then having someone give you a fake $100 bill later that day. Things like that, little synchronicities, how things just work out, can absolutely be validation. In fact, the more you pay attention to these synchronicities, the more they're going to increase, the more you're going to understand the way you're interacting with the universe, which I do have some exciting news about that coming very soon, as far as ways to help you understand how you uniquely interact with the universe, kind of like a decoding the universe situation. So stay tuned on that bit. But beside the point, synchronicities might be your validation. Thinking of a song and that song comes on the radio. Speaking of which, music could be your validation. If you are like, all right, I need to know that if this was a conversation we just had, the next song that I hear needs to affirm that for me in some way. That can be a validation. Or if you have a specific song that comes on anytime that you're feeling down or feeling disconnected, and all of a sudden that song comes on right after you said, hey, I need validation, or before sleep, whatever timeline you gave yourself. That can be a huge way to get validation. Also on that note, sounds in general are something that we don't want to disregard. So my business partner, Crystal Lynn, will leave their phone on loud while we record podcasts, because when something is very important that they are saying on the podcast, the phone will go off. So they will call extra attention to whatever that important thing was, which is a way of having direct communication with your guides via your phone. Like literally your phone. So that is another thing that you can kind of pay attention. Or if you hear a bell ring and whatever, that's another thing. So just to kind of keep that in mind. It can be a specific sign for you, or it can be a style of sign, or you can just ask for that open validation, but don't disregard or not pay attention to all of your different senses. That's what you can pay attention to for validations. So you do not need to trust in a bubble. You do not need to have blind trust right away. You are not failing because you are asking for validation. You are not further behind on your journey because you can't just blindly trust. I will still make my guides validate stuff, and I have literally talked to them for over 10 years at this point, actively, and been very active in my spiritual development for over 10 years. And I still will be like, if you really want me to do that, you better validate me doing that. Like, if you really want me, I know the ping, I get the ping, but if like that is actually what you're wanting me to do, you better make that inevitable for me. This happened very recently. I was at like a family kind of get together thing, and I was like, if you want me to have that conversation with that person, you better bring me some space to bring it up, because I'm not going to go up and bring it up to them. Like, I need that space to be inevitable, and then I will fill it, which of course they did. So I had the conversation that was needed. But that's kind of, again, on your guides to present you with that opportunity. So by all means, ask for validation. Now, if you are tuning in and channeling your guides or your higher self, or deities, or you name it, and you're doing a lot of channeling, and if you're hearing or just knowing, or even seeing images in your mind's eye, it is important to pay attention to where those are coming in from. So when we're thinking to ourselves, this is another really significant way to understand if it's you versus if it's a deity, a guide, etc., an external voice. When we think to ourselves, we're kind of sitting up here in our mind, really kind of up front, in our emotional sort of space, really just thinking and you know, ping-ponging back and forth kind of up here in this sort of zone. When we get communication externally from our guides, higher self, you get it, I already named the list. It comes from a different part of your mind. So sometimes it's usually from like a back here forward sort of zone, especially if you're hearing like inner ear voices, clairaudience stuff. It's a back here forward, moves forward from the back of your head. So it sounds more of like almost an echo, or something that's like whoosh, coming from the head. I don't know what mood I am in today, but here we are. So it's that kind of energy that kind of comes forward from the back there. And so it's important to pay attention, like, oh, I got an image that came from back here, or my just knowing came from back here, or I got a sound that comes from back here. Now with that, especially if you are a hearer, if you're hearing and you're having a communication very audibly, it's not going to typically be someone else's voice right off the bat, because your human brain would be scared as hell if that happened. Genuinely, like if all of a sudden you're like, I'm going to talk to my guides, and then like a deep man's voice starts talking to you, you'd probably freak out, because your human brain's like, hold the phone, that is danger. Like, no, 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 no. So it's going to usually start with, it will be in your voice, but a different cadence, different word choice, different tone. Something about it will be slightly different, so that you can be like, that's a bit odd. That is not usually how I would talk to myself, or that sounds slightly off, or wow, I guess I'm sassy today. Those are things to kind of keep in mind. The other thing too is when it is a random ping, like when it just comes out of nowhere and you're like, okay, random ping, those tend to feel very disconnected from any other thoughts. It's not like in an intrusive thought sort of way. It's like a, hey, you need to buy this hairbrush right now. When you're like, okay, I was just over here shopping for pasta, but apparently I need to buy a hairbrush. This notion of like, buy a hairbrush, when it's literally disconnected from like anything around, you're like, all right, I am at the store, but like that's the closest connection I've got to this. That is another thing where I would then be like, okay, if I need to do that, you better validate that for me. Like, tell me it again, or like have me see some sort of form of validation here. So that is another thing to kind of pay attention to, as far as being able to discern when it's just you and when it's not just you, that like area that it comes in from, and if it is disconnected from other things. Now, if you're asking for guide communication, you're having a back and forth, pay attention when you're thinking with intention to your guides. You're like, okay, I'm thinking to you, it's coming from up here, or even from your heart center a little bit, and then they respond from kind of back here. The more you do this with useless things, which I know I've talked a lot about in the understanding which clairs, like communicating your guides based on your clairs video I did a while back, but the more you do this with casual things, what should I wear today? What should I eat for lunch? Things like in that space, the easier it's going to be when the bigger things come to understand what you've been doing, because it's going to feel simple, it's going to feel normal, and also your human brain's going to feel a lot more comfortable letting those things in, because it is letting in things that it's been letting in with casual what flavor of ice cream should I have sort of questions, not like what is my big life decision that I should make sort of questions. So it'll be more comfortable for you to do that, which is again a practice thing. It's just a practice thing. Now, when in doubt, or if this feels the most comfortable for you, use tools, like physical tools around you that are available to you. You having to do this all just in your head is not a requirement either. Same with like the blind trust thing, but using the tools that you have access to can be incredibly helpful. And those tools can be things like pendulums, if you're in that sort of space, being like, okay, was that actually a guide communicating with me? You can use those tools to also communicate with guides and past loved ones and ghosts and higher self and deities too, of course. But it is really helpful as a validation tool when you've communicated with your guides in your own way. So it doesn't have to be just using the pendulum to communicate with your guides. It can be using the pendulum to validate, I did just communicate. Yes, I did. The pendulum says yes. Awesome. That was an actual communication. So then you can go back and dive in a little bit further and communicate with your guides even further from there. Or cards. You can use cards, whether those are tarot, oracle, or honestly just playing cards. You can come up with a system. You can either get additional validation if you're doing like tarot or oracle cards, be like, okay, I need to be validated that I did just have this conversation with my guides. Again, also the tools can be used on their own, but you know, if you've had additional conversation with them, please validate me. You can pull a card. What I will say is you can do it as simple as like evens mean yes, odds mean no, or blacks mean yes, reds mean no if you're using playing cards, or you can do it deeper again with tarot or oracle cards. They can have a more expansive meaning, right? You pull a card and it's all of a sudden it's the courage card and has a picture of a woman who's the guide you think you were just talking to, and yay, it validates you, or something that they just said to you is associated with the card, something like that. You can always go expand and go deeper and deeper and deeper from there. However, that is an important thing to note, is you can use the cards to do that, and it doesn't have to be deeper from there. You can do a red-black situation with playing cards and be like, oh yes, okay, cool, it validated me, or like, I got a no card, but I really felt like that was me communicating. I'm going to dive in deeper and try to talk more and then get some validation from there, because that could also be part of the case. So you can do that by all means. You can even play like Spotify roulette or like internet video roulette, which is on any platform, on a TikTok or Reels or YouTube Shorts or whatever, where you can be like, okay, like I think I just had this communication with you. I feel really confident about it, but I'm still wondering, please validate me. In the next couple videos that I see, I need some sort of validation, or even the next video I see needs to validate me, or the next song that comes on the radio or on Spotify needs to validate that this came up. Playing that can be really helpful. It can also help to answer questions. If you have a question for your guide and you're not really comfortable communicating with them, but you'd like to get some answers there, you can, of course, pull cards, do pendulum, or you can do the fun roulette situation. You can whip through some videos and get some information from there as well, which can be really helpful. And again, help validate what is yours and what is not. So those are just a couple of techniques. The other one I do want to mention and bring up is muscle testing. Muscle testing is longer than I can teach in this video. There are videos out there on how to do muscle testing. I can make one if you guys need, but I also have it in my courses. So you can understand, basically your muscles communicate with your higher self, with creator, universe energy. And it's just a way of actually getting that information from your muscles, because they don't have all the filters in place like your brain does. So you get that information from your muscles in a really easy and sort of fun, playful way. I've also made videos for that on the other platform. I mean, there's a ton of different ways you can learn about muscle testing. So if you want me to make one specifically, let me know, I will. But if you muscle test, I did actually just have a conversation with my guide. Yes, I did. Awesome. Okay. Or, I actually did tune into that ghost just then. Yes, I did. Awesome. The message I just received is from my guides. Yes, no, whatever. You can really muscle test out, and I'm just showing one way. There's multiple ways. But you can really test that out with muscle testing. And that is a technique I use all the time, including even when I'm at like restaurants and I don't know what is the highest and best for me to order off the menu. Muscle testing. I will do it often. Or every time I go in the shower and I do block pulls for myself. That's my like shower ritual. I will muscle test to find the block that I need to pull. I'll pull the block and then muscle test to ensure that it's gone. You can do it for all sorts of different things. However, if that's something you feel confident and comfortable with, muscle testing is a great way to also be like, I actually tuned in just then. Yes, I did. Perfect. And that is a great way to validate yourself as well. those are just a couple of the ways that you can really start to discern what is your stuff versus like, and just you and your thoughts versus you actually having conversation and communication. The other thing I just want to point out on this too is you can also hold sacred space. So if you create a room, a garden, a beach, a little house, whatever feels good, where that is when you walk yourself in there through visualization, which means see, sense, hear, feel, know, taste, or smell. But when you visualize yourself going into that space, that is when you are speaking with your guides. You are holding that space. That is when you are channeling things. And then when you walk yourself out of that, then you can still ask for validation on top of that. But the more you hold that sacred space, the more it's going to be easier for you to discern the communication that is coming through for you. So that's another thing to do as well. Now, I know that sounds like kind of a lot of information. The big thing I want to instill with this, though, is it is all about practice. No one is requiring you to get this down the first time. All of this is nuanced. It is all incredibly personal. It is all about you and your journey. I had to practice too. I've practiced for years to get really good at these things. It took me time to get here, and that is totally fine. It can take you time. You don't need to know everything about everything all at once. You don't need to instantaneously trust everything all at once. It is okay to practice and play with these things and get in the flow. And the more you practice and get in the flow with it, the easier it's going to be for you to understand when you're getting communication versus when you're not. And I will say, in my experience, when in doubt, I always go for the affirmative. I won't necessarily take action until I've been validated, but if I'm doubting if I was actually having communication, I'll be like, okay, well, I'm going to believe that's communication until proven otherwise or validated for the affirmative. The reason is more often than not it is, in my experience. And I'm not saying go make reckless decisions by any means, but I am just saying more often than not, you are actually being communicated with, and it's important to honor that. Couple final just thoughts on this before I end this video out. Don't disregard random. Things happen randomly. If things pop up randomly, if someone reaches out to you randomly, don't disregard those things. Random, more often than not, is divine timing. It's more often than not I've said more often than not like 7 fucking times. What is going on? Anyway, it is typically the universe communicating with you or reaching out to you in some way. That doesn't mean it's something that you need to like bite onto. If an ex reaches out to you like, yay, random, I will embrace this fully. It's just there's probably meaning there, and that is something important to kind of pay attention to. So don't disregard random. Also, if you get a message or a ping, or if you're communicating and 2 or more of your senses combine to give you that message or a ping, that's another thing I wouldn't disregard, because that also is a very significant indicator in validation. So for example, if you get a just knowing and then your body gets really hot, those are 2 senses combining. Pay attention to that. Or if you get a flood of excitement out of nowhere and then hear a message, those are 2 senses combining. Pay attention to that, because that's kind of like your guides validating as they communicate, not validating after the fact. You can always still ask for validation on top of that, but that is important to note. When 2 or more senses combine, oftentimes they are trying to validate you with the fact that they are speaking to you directly. Of course, as with all of this stuff, do not push yourself too hard. If you get overwhelmed, take a pause. This is not something you have to overdo. And find people you can talk to about it, whether that is like friends or a therapist. Spirituality is not an exception for therapy. So finding a therapist to talk through about your journey with as well is super important. Anybody genuinely anybody that you feel comfortable and confident talking to, that will help you develop as well. Even if you're just journaling, that is a form of kind of talking to yourself, but really having some active journal time or channeled journal time is another really important resource to take advantage of as you're starting in this journey and trying to figure out who's talking to you and when and all of those sorts of things that'll help you notice your patterns and understand them in a more healthy and fulfilled way. I think that is about it for this video. One other thing, just really quick, the more healing work you do for yourself, again, talking on that therapy, the easier psychic spiritual stuff becomes. Whether you are doing that with like physical healing stuff or emotional healing stuff or mental healing stuff, all of it all will benefit you, which is why when I talk about like block pulling and releasing, we're talking about releasing blocks from a whole bunch of different areas to help your magical river flow. It doesn't just have to be in the magic zone. So no, the more that you're working on yourself and developing yourself, the more this will naturally develop as well. You are perfectly in your divine timing. You are here. You are in the right space. And just know that I honor you and I see you. Thank you for being here. Of course, if this video resonated with you, please like, subscribe to my channel, and feel free to comment below if this did resonate with you, and how guide communication has showed up for you before, any fun validation stories. I love reading those. So I would love reading those in the comments as well. All the information on how to work with me, I do offer readings, I offer courses, I offer Patreon, tons of different stuff. I also offer fun adventure opportunities, more on that to come. All of that is listed below this video. If you want to check that out, it would be super fantastic for me to get to work with you further. Thank you so much for being here. Yeah, and remember, you are magical as fuck. Have an amazing rest of your day.